Welcome to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few, USPIE's weekly podcast that empowers parents to reclaim their children's education from government bureaucrats and social engineers, equipping you with the tools and resources needed to join the cause.
The key problems with the government schools, one is government involvement, especially the federal government. Two are the colleges of education. Supplemental to that is teacher certification. And then the standards and assessments that have been placed in each state and in each government school. And finally, the teachers' unions. At the end of the report, we cover solutions.
Hi everyone, welcome to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few. I'm your host, Sherry Few, and I have another great show for you today. Joining me again is fellow USPIE board member and president of our Michigan chapter, Melanie Kurdys. Today we're diving into a brand new USPIE report titled, Are Government Schools Redeemable? Before we dive in, please take a moment to give us a 5-star rating, share the episode with a friend, and don't forget to visit uspie.org to join the movement.
Today's episode is brought to you by U.S. parents involved in education. USPIE's mission is to empower parents and local communities to break free from federal and national influences, thereby reclaiming parental authority over their children's education. For more insights from U.S. parents involved in education, connect with us at USPIE on X and Facebook. To join the movement, visit uspie.org.
Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few. I'm your host, Sherry Few. And back with me today is my friend and fellow USPIE board member, Melanie Kurdys. Melanie is the chief architect of USPIE's blueprint to close the U.S. Department of Education, as well as our blueprint to establish state control of education. But today we're diving into a brand new USPIE report titled, Are Government Schools Redeemable? Melanie Kurdys, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you very much, Sherry. It's a real honor to work with you and the other leaders on our PIE group. We have a great team, and it's just an honor to be part of the group.
Well, thank you, Melanie. The feeling is mutual. You're quite an asset to USPIE. As I've described in your intro, that you've been the chief architect of some of our most substantial reporting. And that's no exception with the report today. I think it's the first of its kind on K-12 education, and I'm really excited to introduce it to our audience and to Americans, as we're going to have a multi-pronged approach of releasing the report. So before we get into the details of the new report, let me ask you, for the audience's sake, what motivated USPIE to take on the big question of whether government schools are even redeemable?
We don't like to be just a complaining organization and a criticizing organization. We tend to look for solutions. So the question was, are they redeemable? What are the big hurdles? Why are there problems? And what could be done? And it was quite an undertaking. It took us about a year and a half, I think, of actually brainstorming and trying to figure out what were the core problems, because there's so many, and then what solutions might be addressed.
Okay, that's a great explanation. So let's start by having you give an overview of the report, and then we can break each of the issues down. There's 5 key issues that we addressed in the report. So yeah, start with the overview, and then we'll get into each of the 5 key issues.
So what we covered, we summarized the key problems with the government schools. One is government involvement, especially the federal government, but the federal government involvement. 2 are the colleges of education, where the teachers are supposed to be learning how to be teachers. And supplemental to that is teacher certification, which follows on. If you don't go to a college of ed, you still have to get certified. And then the standards and assessments that have been placed in each state and in each government school. And finally, the teachers' unions. Those are all the problems. And then at the end of the report, we cover solutions and what different sections of groups of people can do to address these.
Okay, great. So, and I'm just going to show our audience, this is the cover of our new report. We're real excited about it. and it's concise. It's not a difficult read. We've made it very simple, unlike most legislation that comes out of Congress is so convoluted you can't understand it. So I'm very proud of the work we've done. So you've laid out what we can expect as an overview. So let's talk about the first issue is government involvement. And I think there's probably a reason we put that first and foremost as the primary issue. So why is this the number one roadblock to redeeming government schools?
Well, the federal government contributes about 10% of the funding to government schools, and yet it has outsized control and influence over what's happening in the classroom. And fundamentally, education is a very personal issue. Every child learns differently. It's a very personal relationship between whoever that child's teacher is and the student, understanding them and their circumstances. There's no way of the federal government policy positioning can establish guidelines for all schools to follow that will help all children succeed. It's just a huge overreach. And quite frankly, there was never any statement in our Constitution to allow government involvement in education, even though everyone agreed it was very important. And they did allow for allotments of space to be available to establish schools, but there was no statement about government schools. And it came about over time where you just had this philosophy that came in that surely schools will be better if they are standardized and teachers are standardized and all of that. And it just took hold. And quite frankly, that is exactly wrong. It's not what we were doing at the beginning when there's lots of evidence that everyday Americans were very well read and able to participate in our constitutional republic. And that people would note that many famous people who visited the United States at that time were quite impressed with the standard citizen, the everyday citizen, and their knowledge of our founding and of history and of the Bible and the kinds of things that give you a broad perspective to be able to participate in a constitutional republic.
Okay, so yeah, in the report, we lay out how in the beginning, which you were just talking about, we had very well educated people prior to government running schools. So initially, we didn't have universal government schools. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, as I said, most of the people back then were homeschooled or they went to religious schools, church-based schools, and they read because they learned how to read, and then they read because they wanted to read, and they realized that reading was a good way of learning. And people read the Bible, and if you read the Bible, it's from even just a literary point of view, not just a religious point of view. It's a very well-written document to help people be able to read and understand the world and understand human nature. And of course, the good message that's in the Bible carries with it then the foundational structure that helps people see like the 10 Commandments and the general sense of why there are rules in our society that everybody should follow and we all benefit from. So it was a huge shift to move away from this private enterprise to a government structured education.
Right, and I've heard it said that when they invented the printing press, and people had their own copy of the scriptures for the first time, there was a big push for people being able to read and be able to read the scriptures on their own. So I think that had an influence too. And then I think, as you document in the report, there were some nefarious people that got involved that pushed for the universal government schools. Wasn't it Horace Mann that led that effort back in the early 1800s?
Right. Horace Mann was a huge pusher of this idea, and it was actually, what was it, 1840s. Yeah, he was quite a key player in this move. But interestingly, a lot of people picked it up. It wasn't an idea that was considered folly. It was picked up by politicians because it is the nature of politicians to want to, well, some would graciously say fix things, others might suggest control things, but overreach of politicians, anybody who gets some power, their tendency to overreach is normal. It's normal human behavior. And so this is a huge overreach that has undermined the overall citizenry of the United States, because most of our children can't read and most of our adults don't read very well. And so you really undermine your ability to participate in a constitutional republic if you are not well-read, deep, critical thinking. So it's really was a U-turn that we haven't interrupted, that we really need to take this opportunity to interrupt.
Okay, so let's talk about the second issue that's discussed in our report, and that is colleges of education. And I know that this is a big issue. In a lot of the interviews I do, we talk about, because it started really in the colleges of education before it crept down to K-12. I think it's been happening, and when I say it's the liberal indoctrination, the leftist ideologies have been in the colleges of education for probably several decades, and now has creeped into K-12. So talk to us a little bit about the colleges of education and what we lay out in the report as far as why it's another major roadblock to redeeming government schools.
Well, it's controversial to say, but there's a lot of research that supports the finding that the people who choose to study education in the colleges of education are on the lower side of academic achievement of all college attendees. And you've got an audience then of people who don't bring with them a strong academic, deep critical thinking skills from their K-12 experience. I actually had a friend, we didn't include this in the report, but I knew the president of Western Michigan University, and I asked him about this, and he said the problem is that many colleges, the College of Education is a cash cow because it's easy to put a lot of people into, easy to teach the classes. There's not a lot of technology or overhead investment, and you get a lot of people there and you move them through and you get a lot of graduates. And so it's created a system where the people themselves were not really the top of the class in terms of understanding math, for example, and understanding biology and history and all the academic subjects themselves. And then they also stopped teaching phonics as the core method of teaching reading, moving to a new philosophy of whole language, and which was disproven many times, but we still have what we call now balanced literacy, which introduces a little bit of phonics and still introduces a lot of whole language. And so we've got an education system that is not preparing our teachers to teach academically well. And as you mentioned, then on top of it, they've started introducing this ideology that is a leftist thinking, which is the critical race theory or critical theory, where you've got an oppressor and an oppressed, and every group can be seen and defined that way, whether it's male, female, gay, straight, black, white, rich, poor, and you teach in this lens that everybody is either an oppressed or an oppressor, and it alienates the students from each other. It's not a good way to create a society where people respect each other and depend on each other. It creates animosity and bad feelings. So what we've done is we've created a system where you have people who are more easily swayed taught these things themselves and then put in the classroom, which they then turn around and teach their students.
It's even a method of teaching more so than a curriculum, which is what I like to explain to a lot of people, because they think that you're going to find a textbook that says critical race theory and or LGBTQ instruction, but that's not what we're seeing. Is that it's more of a they're teaching teachers to embed it in every grade level in every subject. So it's not even something you can easily identify to remove, but it's a pedagogy, a method of teaching that they're training teachers in regarding these leftist ideologies. And it's even broader than the critical theories and the Marxism. There's the anti-American propaganda and all of that we see happening in the K-12 now has been the teachers have been thoroughly indoctrinated in, and I believe they even think they're doing the right thing. They believe in what they're teaching. And don't you agree?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you sit in school board meetings or the state board meeting and you have the conversation about these the literature that they're including in elementary school that is graphically pornographic to a lot of us. And yet you have other adults arguing that it's good literature, or they're going to be exposed to it anyway, or you have to include all thinking, and you're taking away the innocence of children, early on, and people are arguing that this is appropriate. And so you can tell they genuinely feel they're doing the right thing. And so it's very hard to break this. This is one of the reasons why fixing the government schools is so difficult, because you have a whole cohort of people who think this way and think it's right. And it's so contradictory to what so many parents believe and want for their children.
Absolutely. So the problematic system for teacher certification is closely related to the colleges of education. So explain how that is also a roadblock, the teacher certification system that we currently have established.
So in some states, they allow like a person who majored in biology or majored in math in college to become a teacher. But to do so, you have to get a teacher certification. And so the very process of going through this certification to get this certification means you have to take these classes that are indoctrinating. And what we see happening is people want to become a teacher, so they go along so that they can pass the class and get the certification. And they don't push back because in their peer group, they feel like, odd man out. It might be if one person was willing to speak up that others would also, but that's one way. And then when they get into the school, they keep their head down and they don't try to push back. So you may have a really good biology teacher or a math teacher who actually doesn't buy into the ideology that we're talking about, but they understand it, and they understand they're not supposed to speak against it or they won't be there. And so that keeps all the teachers in line. So the certification process is the means by which you keep all teachers in line.
We need to take a short break, but when we come back, we will discuss the other two issues identified in the report and our conclusions and recommendations for those who want to try to fix government schools. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this. In 2017, U.S. Parents Involved in Education published a detailed blueprint to close the U.S. Department of Education and end all federal education mandates. We are pleased to report that Congressman Barry Moore of Alabama has taken up this cause by filing H.R. 2691. This legislation is significant because it does more than just close the Department of Education. It transfers all its functions back to the states. The only exception is that the college loan and Pell Grant programs are transferred to the Department of Treasury. The bill also block grants funds for these former federal programs to the states, allowing greater local control. This step is promising, but USPIE is recommending an amendment to make the block grant process more efficient. We encourage parents and citizens to join us in thanking Congressman Moore. For more information and to join our movement, visit uspie.org and connect with us at USPIE on Facebook and X. Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few. With me today is my friend and fellow board member, Melanie Kurdys. Another important issue that speaks to whether government schools are redeemable is standards and assessments. So, Melanie, please start by telling the audience about the history of standards and assessments in America and why they are ineffective and stand in the way of student achievement.
So a long time ago, we had these general rules of educating children that parents kind of just knew generationally was passed on, that, children learn to walk, they learn to talk, they learn to read, and you work through these things and people understood what was generally age appropriate. And for example, if a child isn't walking by about 12 months, there's something perhaps structurally wrong, which you typically could diagnose at 9 or 10 months when you're not seeing them stand and so forth. And so a standard that says all children will walk at 12 months is a silly thing to establish when you're looking at individual children. And the standards that are age appropriate don't need to be written down and governed. And when especially if you look at the standards today, there are so many of them, and it's overwhelming for teachers. And they're really not designed to be helpful, but designed more to be punishment, which is then talks into the assessment, where I know originally people were thinking that assessments were designed to hold schools accountable, but they've become overwhelming. They're demanding in terms of the time, and the assessment seems to be the goal over real learning. And we've forgotten that the assessments should have been used just on an individual basis or on a school-wide basis to assess the system and not as general punishment. Now, we did have one period in our current history that was actually good. Before Common Core, every state was encouraged to come up with standards, and Massachusetts had really outstanding English language arts and math standards. And they were aligned with their assessments, which were straightforward. Parents could see them. They were published so that everybody knew what kinds of questions were being asked and all of that stuff. And but of course, after the students took them, they put them out again. And so the standards, the assessments, and the teacher certification or teacher courses were all aligned to excellent teaching methods like phonics and structured math and the things we all know, cursive writing, the things we all know are important elements to developing for children for real teaching. And in their 5 to 6 years that those standards were in place, every group improved in outcomes, in real achievement. The boys and girls, blacks and whites, rich and poor, every group improved in actual achievement. And yet, when the federal government supported Common Core with money, every state, including Massachusetts, threw their standards out and picked up these unproven, clearly ineffective standards of Common Core and the aligned assessments. And even today, even though some states claim to have gotten rid of Common Core, they really haven't. They might have added other standards that then makes Common Core a smaller percentage. They reworded some things, but in essence, the same ineffective standards are in place, which is why it's no surprise that our actual achievement on reading and math are continuing to be deplorable.
My recollection about the Massachusetts standards was that they not only ranked the best in our country, but they were compared to other countries. They stood alone in their scores compared to other countries and ranked, was it fourth, third or fourth, like in the world as far as their outcomes? That's what I remember. And of course, Sandra Stotsky was the chief architect of those standards, and she's kept those standards available to any state that wants to look at them and adopt them. And that's certainly an option for states. They're not tied to the Common Core. And I know that Florida has backed out of Common Core and is supposed to have some better standards. So they're not only ineffective, which you've mentioned, but they're even damaging to a child's educational career. What the most egregious thing that I recall from Common Core, and of course it's still in place in every state in the nation except Florida, is the K through 12 standards were developmentally inappropriate, which caused children to be frustrated and not want to learn, not want to go to school. And we know that, while the child is in that fundamental stage of learning, that's when they develop maybe their love for reading and all the fundamentals that they need. So the standards, some of us skeptics believe were intentional to try to further dumb down the American citizenry and other things that were employed that were nefarious, like the standards that tell children that it's their responsibility to fix problems in society and basically become social justice warriors. Those standards, I think, we're seeing played out in the streets today. So those were a couple of things that I remembered about Common Core. And then you touched on the current state of academic achievement in our country. You want to touch on that a little bit about what the most recent scores are?
Yeah, the recent NAEP showed, what is it, about 31% of fourth graders and 30% of eighth graders can read at their grade level. That's really that's embarrassing. But it's worse. It's undermining their ability to participate in our constitutional republic.
Amen. Amen. And some of us believe that's an intentional agenda. The high school scores that came out a couple of weeks ago were very alarming as well. They said seniors across the country, on average, 45% scored below basic. That's the lowest rung on the scale. That's not even your basic. It's not proficient. It's below basic. Excuse me, that was math. I'm not sure if I said reading. That was the math score. And then the reading was similarly dismal, but it was about a third ranked below basic in reading. So we're saying these children probably can't do math or read, and they're graduating high school.
And people could be misled by this terminology, but proficient and above proficient are the only acceptable levels of achievement that a school should be generating. When you have what's called basic, that is not proficient. And the group you talked about, below basic, so that's segmenting the group of kids who can't read at grade level into two categories: bad and worse. And what you're pointing out is the worst number is getting bigger. So we're not just losing proficiency, we're losing the ability to become proficient as they get older because they are so far behind. And this is really concerning, because generations go by, and if we have more and more people in our society who cannot read at a proficient level.
Yeah, and I like what I hear you say sometimes too about critics of homeschooling, that they're concerned that there's no accountability, that we can't be sure children are learning. And you like to say, well, you couldn't do any worse than what the government schools are doing according to the scores that are out there today.
Yes, it's hard
So,
to imagine parents could possibly do worse.
yes, that's right. Exactly right. So, the fifth and final issue in the report is teachers' unions. So, I'll have to admit that when I do interviews, that's probably one of the most common things that come up from the host of the show where I'm being interviewed is teachers' unions. I think everybody is pretty much convinced uh, that they're evil and the influence they have over the government schools is evil. And they're not really interested in the best, they're not interested in helping children learn. It's more about pushing a political agenda. So, talk a little bit about what we report about teachers' unions in this report.
Well, it's about 80% of our public school teachers are in a union, so the numbers are really big. And they were originally founded, like most unions, to protect the worker, not to protect the agenda of the worker. So in this case, it's to protect the teacher, not to protect learning in the schools. And so it's hard to criticize that purpose, but what's happened is through teachers' union dues that are compulsory in most states, participation is compulsory in most states. They get a lot of money, and their leadership does have a political agenda, and it is a leftist ideology. And they influence public policy. They have a very big influence on public policy. The numbers on I forget exactly what the dollar level was, but it's the it was like $300 million in the last election, and almost all of it goes to the Democratic Party. And it's because they have a particular ideology. And as I said, it's not to improve the educational outcomes of schools or to support teachers in their ability to generate educational outcomes. You can tell in the rules they have about tenure and in protecting bad teachers, even criminal teachers. They put the survival of the teacher themselves ahead of what's good for children, and they just have an outsized level of influence. And a lot of it is that through that money, that if more states had right to work where teachers didn't have to participate in the union, then and if some conservative type unions would develop, you might have a competitive system. But you could see both of those are huge hurdles, which again gets back to the question about, are government schools redeemable? How could you reduce the influence of the unions? You can see that itself is going to be a huge undertaking.
Yeah, so in states where they have right to work, which is the state that I live in, South Carolina, is a right to work state. Even though we don't have unions per se, we have trade associations that act like unions. So, for example, the affiliate with NEA is our South Carolina Education Association. So they're not officially a union, but they're very active in pushing the same agenda as the NEA here within our state. So, there's all sorts of education trade associations, as you're well aware, the school boards associations, the school administrators associations, the list goes on. There are many of them. And they are very involved in politics, just like the unions, the official unions on the national level. And we know from their own conventions, because we have whistleblowers that come out and tell us everything they voted on in their conventions, and there are outrageous things like supporting the pushback and the riot in the streets, and using the terminology fascist for Donald Trump. And so they're actually voting on these things in their convention, and then, like you pointed out, lining the pockets of politicians as a huge lobbyist. And it's on both sides of the aisle, as you well know. I mean, the Republicans have been guilty of making bad policy decisions, I think, because of the huge lobby. And I think they fear the fact that teachers represent a large voting bloc. So they're afraid to alienate any teachers. and do anything that might be against the general thought of what's right in education in the government schools. So it is a huge hurdle and absolutely a prominent roadblock to redeeming government schools. So you laid that out really well. So let's talk now about our conclusions in the report. And then we came up with some ideas for Congress and for states and for those who want to try to fix government schools if they're not convinced with our conclusions. So why don't you start with our conclusion?
Okay, so I think this doesn't say this as our first conclusion, but if you haven't understood it yet, we still believe parents should get their kids out of government schools and educate them, exercise the choice you have now, pay for it out of your own pocket, and get your kids out of the government schools because they are expensive and bloated and ineffective. And the only way that we're going to actually break through this is to reduce the money that they have. And so this all ties together. So overall, it's that the colleges of education are ineffective, and that the installed base of teachers don't know how to teach properly, that the teacher certification reinforces that for the strategies that states might have come up with of alternate methods for people to become teachers, that the standards and assessments are inappropriate and ineffective, and that the teacher unions are a major roadblock to preventing government schools from getting better. So in the short term, and I'm not sure what, if you consider 10 years, maybe short term still, we strongly recommend that parents get their children out of government schools.
So the final conclusion, though, is we do not believe they're redeemable. Is that correct?
Right? Well, we said if they're not redeemable in the short term, and if people really were committed to improving government schools, it's going to be a long, difficult battle. And it's not to say it couldn't be done. That's what was really important in our work, that we are a solutions-oriented group, but we're also practical about how hard these things are. I mean, just take, for example, the teachers union. There's so much money in the union. Even in the states where you have right to work and teachers don't have to join a union, most do because they are ideologically aligned to their union. So it's a system of money and influence that's very difficult to break. So one of the really important changes that we're recommending, okay, so first is to close the Federal Department of Education, because that is where an awful lot of undue influence comes from. So given that that's what President Donald Trump says he wants to do, that's what we support. It should be done, and we're working to help make that happen. So that's number one. But number two is we think that the states should really exercise their freedom and get out from under the Federal Department of Education. And that was the blueprint we wrote to help states get away from the federal spending. And we have guidelines for how to do that, a step-by-step approach. And we're happy to help any state that wants to launch into that. But then also importantly, states need to protect homeschooling and private schooling to make sure that they retain their freedoms and independence. As you mentioned, we are strongly against any kind of voucher or program that gives the appearance that the government is giving you money to exercise your choice. Every time that happens, it's, he who has the gold makes the rules. They will follow strings and with that money. And so I've given the example, whereas if you have a public transit in your community and you decide you don't want to use public transit, you want your own car, and then you demand the government give you money to buy your own car, and they give you your car and they say, well, you can only buy a white 2-seater EV. And that's what you can buy. And that's the way we end up with it. If you take your kids out of the government school and then you demand the government give you money to school them yourself, they will tell you how to do it and what's acceptable. And you might start out your first year or two being free to teach what you want, but it won't take very long. That historically it shows the more a program is used, the more it's regulated. And so that will come with that.
What Alex Newman likes to say about school choice is that it's actually a part of UNESCO. That's the United Nations education, whatever. UNESCO, it's the education arm of the UN. It is their goal to control all education across the world. And it's even in their goals to take over all forms of education, including home education. So it is about fundamentally, and I talk about this a lot too, it's fundamentally about our country's freedom, because they are moving fast toward this goal of one world government, and they know if they can control the education of students all across the world, then they can be successful in achieving, much more successful, obviously, in achieving their goal. So that's an issue it has a big, broad reach. And so many, especially the moms and dads that are involved with the movement to push back on education, which is such a blessing. Ever since COVID, we've seen this, parents protesting at school boards and speaking out. So many of them have fallen for this idea. They have drank the Kool-Aid that, I need to have an alternative. The government owes me money because I'm paying taxes and my kids aren't going to the government school. Well, that's what we need to try to help parents to understand, that, as you stated, eventually they will be controlling what your children learn, just like they are in the government schools today. It will eventually become that. And we need to be proactive in fighting against allowing the government to take any further steps towards controlling other forms of education, private and homeschooling, or home education, as Sam Sorbo has taught me to call it, home education, because schooling is what the government does, and what you do at home is educating your children. So it's just real important, I think, to try to reiterate that as often as we can. And then we have an alternative. And I think it's in the report. Yes, it's in the report too, that we recommend, and maybe I'll let you explain that, but it's a tax credit. I mean, we could even just double the federal child tax credit now, or raise it to a significant amount for parents who don't have their children in government schools. But we even thought we could incorporate it in Congressman Moore's bill, which is aligned with President Trump's executive order to close the Department of Ed. So you want to touch on that just a little bit, Congressman Moore's bill?
Okay, well, first, let me just reiterate that there is no political party that doesn't believe in regulating government money. The Republicans do it for accountability, and the Democrats do it for accountability and control. So there is no party that you can hang your hat on that if they give you the money, that you won't be regulated. That's there's no historic evidence to prove that that's the case. And the tax credit that exists now means you're not paying that you have a child tax deduction or credit just because you have a child. The money you get, you keep. That it's not money you're getting back from the government, it's money you keep. You don't pay it to the government in the first place. It's because you have a child, and the government is acknowledging that if you have children, it costs you more to run your life. The underlying philosophy of many of our recommendations is to reduce government spending. So if the federal government got out of all education, and the states stopped taking money, that is 10% of most state education budgets that would not need to be collected by the federal government. So it would be a huge reduction in federal tax income necessary, because they're not paying for this service anymore. And the same then can happen in the states, that if all money from the state that goes to the state government schools is on a per pupil allotment, that as parents make choices to pull their kids out, the state fund needs less money because the schools will lose money through declining enrollment. And if the state needs less money, that money should be reflected in a reduction in whether it's income tax or property tax, whatever the tax structure is in the state related to education. And so if you look at it from the other perspective that's happening right now, so for example, preschool, there's a big push for free preschool, meaning government funded for everyone. Now, we have a huge system of private preschool in this country. So the minute the government takes on this free preschool for all children, they will, number one, put a lot of private businesses out of business because who would pay for it if you can get it for free? That's the argument. And secondly, it will increase the tax burden because now the government has taken on another function that it didn't have. And the whole thing is ridiculous because if you can't teach kids when you have them K-12, what makes anybody think if they show up a year early, all of a sudden they're going to know what they're doing? So it's a really good example. I think the other one that we've talked about, Sherry, is the this tax credit system where states are actually establishing another funding of schools to fund home and private schools. Now you're adding, you're funding your government schools and you're funding your private schools, which aren't private anymore, all to the negative impact of the taxpayer and for no positive outcome for students. There's no correlation to government money being available that improves outcomes for students. So it's really important to understand the philosophy of what we're recommending here, and all of the specifics inside the report revolve around these ideas that education is a very personal thing. It is best done as close to home as possible, whether it's home education like Sam talks about, whether it's small co-ops, whether it's church communities. It's small, close to home, able to be targeted to the children that are in that community and their needs, and to continuously reduce the money available for unions to be powerful, reduce the money available to the federal and state governments to enforce their regulation, that when you go back to privatizing, you reduce the government's ability to make it horrible for all of us. What I would really encourage people to do is read the report, and then think about your community and your personal ability to contribute. Do you like to work on the local level? Do you like to work at the state level? Do you like to work at the federal level? There are ideas for anywhere you wanna do it. We can help people if they want to figure out how to homeschool or build a homeschool co-op or home educate and build that. We have contacts we can help people with. So you can join USPIE and join the movement and become part of our network. And if you think about, there's so much work to be done here, because I think giving up on the government schools completely, it's hard to imagine that we would actually get to a point where they would be gone, but I can't imagine they could be way better and we could have it back to the communities the way it was before. So if everybody who is interested and listens to this podcast would read the report and look for the role you can play, because like I said, we offer things that can be done at the federal level, at the state level, at your local level.
That's great. So, of course, they can find the report at our website, which is uspie.org, and it's prominently displayed on the homepage. It's downloadable. We pray that you will even share it with the decision makers in your communities. And let's begin the discussion. Because as Melanie pointed out, one of the most advantageous things about what we're recommending is reducing taxes. And I think so many of us are fed up with the billions. I mean, and it is billions. It's tens of billion on the federal level each year. So, just closing the Department of Education could save taxpayers so much money.
One other thing I wanted to point out, Sherry, you mentioned Congressman Barry Moore from Alabama's bill. It's number HR 2691, if you're interested in looking it up. It is one of several bills that are currently in Congress where they're looking at closing the Federal Department of Education. It is the best one, in our opinion, because it actually does get the federal government out of all education. There are several other bills. Thomas Massey has a bill. It's very generic. It's not specific enough. There are other bills that mirror what we understand to be Heritage's recommendation, and that is to move functions to other departments and then close the Federal Department of Education. We don't support that at all. It makes those other departments, the education issues less visible, harder to track. And for goodness sakes, if the Department of Education can't do the education very well, why would anyone think the Department of Labor or the Department of Health and Human Services is going to do a better job? And so we really prefer this bill. That's HR 2691. Congressman Barry Moore, if you have a chance to talk to your congressman, we strongly recommend that bill. And as Sherry said, we do have a friendly amendment we're discussing with them to try to include the means for the taxes for parents who opt out of government education to be not paid into the federal department at all, so that we get that money going back to the parents, but not via money from the government. It's just a reduction in your tax base.
Very important discussion. We need to take another short break, but when we come back, Melanie, I'd like to ask you 2 questions I ask all my guests before closing the show. So don't go away. I'll be back with my interview with Melanie Kurdys right after this. U.S. Parents Involved in Education strongly appreciates Alabama Congressman Barry Moore's H.R. 2691 to close the U.S. Department of Education and eliminate burdensome federal mandates. This bill proposes block granting funds to states based on the amount of income taxes paid by each state's residents. Part of the block grant funds could be allocated as a federal income tax deduction for parents who opt out of government schools. The remaining funds would then be sent directly to each state's education fund. USPIE supports this amendment as it promotes freedom, flexibility, and parental choice. We urge citizens to advocate for this amendment and support legislation that empowers parents while reducing federal overreach. For more information and to join our movement, visit uspie.org and connect with us at USPIE on Facebook and X. Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few. With me today has been Melanie Kurdys, fellow USPIE board member and chapter president for Michigan. So we close our show with 2 important questions. So Melanie, tell us what concerns you most about what's happening in education today and what gives you hope.
Well, we are on the cusp of a real opportunity here, and that gives me hope. But elected officials really have a hard time giving up control. And we have a quote in closing in our report that I think really says it very well. It says, "Parents are the first best educators of their children." And this is not a slogan, not a throwaway campaign line. It's a fundamental law. Elected officials must embrace the truth and resist the temptation to govern education, and should return control to the only people who are properly positioned to hold educators and the education system accountable: parents. And I am very hopeful that I think more and more parents are becoming aware, more community members are becoming aware. I just had a conversation with somebody from the area where I graduated from high school, and a community member, and we asked, "What do you think about the schools in the community?" And to her credit, she didn't do the typical, oh, my schools are fine, everybody else's schools are bad. Her comment was that our school is having the same problems as every other school in the country, and it's a shame. So we were very heartened to hear that. I think that's a very hopeful circumstance. And I just hope that elected officials can be fair and trust the citizens the way our founding fathers trusted the citizens, and let us teach our own children.
Yes, that's very well said. And you've also said, I've heard you say before, that we need legislators to quit trying to control education, because that's absolutely what they try to do with all of the laws that they pass. So, Melanie, this has been a great discussion. Thank you so much for joining me today to discuss our report, Our Government Schools Redeemable. So I'll just remind the audience that they can find the report on our website at uspie.org. Please join the movement while you're there. And thanks again for taking the time to come on the show. If you found today's discussion eye-opening, please share this episode with a friend, give us a 5-star rating, and subscribe to stay informed. You can connect with us on Facebook and X at USPIE and visit uspie.org to join the movement. Until next time, I'm Sherry Few. Thank you for your support of USPIE and our efforts to unmask government schools.
U.S. Parents Involved in Education is a nonprofit coalition dedicated to restoring local control of education and parental authority. By empowering parents to reclaim responsibility for their children's learning and encouraging states to move away from federal influence, USPIE seeks to create a culture where parents are the primary decision makers in education and schools support families without the burden of federal mandates. If you want to start a state or regional USPIE chapter in your area, please visit uspie.org and complete the brief questionnaire in the chapters section.